All right, let's get started. So this is our September webinar. It's a little bit different this go around. We're doing it as kind of an open forum. So we have John and Steve. You can see their webcams at the top. They're going to be talking through some things, and we want your guys' participation. So if you would like, you can chime in via the questions pane, raise your hand, and we're just going to kind of go through this. They're going to, again, open dialogue. And I'm going to pass it off to John. He'll introduce Steve, and we will go from there.
Okay, everyone. So I guess I'll start with an he said an introduction to Steve, and I don't know what Steve has done. I know he sits on lots of committees. I know he has been teaching the CMVP forever. I met Steve, I'd say my first year in the business, which I think was 1996. In Hawaii, where it's interesting. I just realized, he hasn't really changed his tune. He was explaining to a bunch of us in Hawaii, that M&V is really not that hard. Look, you got light bulbs that were on, now they're off, or because we turned them off. That was our ECM, and see how easy it is, and it's not that hard. But that was how we met, and then I tried to tell him, no, I think it is more complicated, but now I've come around to believing maybe he was right after all. But Steve, is there anything that we go ahead and tell them something else about your past, at least to say, I don't know, because I really don't know what you've been doing.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, wherever you are. Yeah, John, thanks. I'm looking at the list of attendees first and just seeing some names I've known since almost from the beginning. I'm also wondering if there's any CMVP people out there that have taken the class. So if you have, welcome. And yeah, John asked me to speak this time because we've maintained a conversation for quite a long while now, and you all must know exactly what John does and his company. And where I've been on this ride is along the side, so to speak, mainly interested in the tools and documents that support M&V. The protocols. That's what kind of got me started on this thing. So John asked me a little, the background I think that's relevant is that I spent a lot of the late 80s actually monitoring buildings. So I took devices, current transformers, flow meters, different projects we were working on, and in my 20s, went out into the world and learned all the things you learn when you go to the real world in terms of the difficulties of putting metering into buildings and what you find when you get there, opening panels and all that stuff, the kind of war story stuff. And I got a chance after that to end up at Lawrence Berkeley Lab for the facilities department, where we put that into play, but also got funded by the in-house energy management group at Lawrence Berkeley Lab to do a bunch of energy conservation. So that was actually, the fun part was actually not just metering the buildings for end use studies, where's the energy going, but actually doing the projects and then metering them on the buildings themselves at Lawrence Berkeley. We had a good budget for that. And around 93, they said, oh, we're gonna do this one project where we're bringing in some financing from the outside. It's called performance contracting. And I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. It sounds interesting, sounds complex, sounds complicated. And the first person they hired to help out with the M&V for that he had a quadratic equation, or actually exponential, many terms in it, and he did a really complicated formulation for how to quantify energy in a building. And I thought, this is over my head. Michael Ray, was like, rest in peace, he actually ended up passing away on his airplane crash, so I got the job to follow in his footsteps and try and do the M&V for this pilot project called Building 62 at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. And yeah, the more we looked at it, the more we started to unveil in a performance contract setting the challenges of risk allocation. Who's doing what? Who should be held accountable for what? What do you measure in a performance contract to assess the impact of the measure they install? And then how do you quantify that over time? So, we took a long look at that, got paid to install a bunch of metering and actually do the measures and work out all the contractual stuff. And on the basis of that, the FEMP program was doing that widely across the US. So the FEMP was Federal Energy Management Program. And they were looking at opening up a possibility of doing performance contracting in large amounts in the US for the first time, federal government. Some law, EPACT in 92 had been signed. And suddenly you could sign multi-year contracts, and that's what they decided to try and do. So FEMP wanted from Lawrence Berkeley Lab to teach them what things we learned about M&V, and then to promulgate that in a standard for FEMP. And I got hired and sent back to Washington, DC to do that for a year in 94. And the first thing I did was go down to ASHRAE and said, well, if we're going to learn a technical answer to this, we'll find an ASHRAE committee and we'll solve it, because it's really complex and it's over my head. And so it didn't work out. The first meeting was New Orleans in 94. They were going to work out a guideline 14. Long story short, by June, they were supposed to have something together. In the June of 94, they didn't. So I was forced on my deadline to get something to FEMP later that year. They only had a year. And so that's when the idea of IPMVP was born, an industry-led group that picked up things like the ESCO standard in 93. Anybody familiar with that? This is a standard for NAESCO in 93, and it's all by end use. It's all by how you do VFDs or lights or whatever. Then we also picked up other documents, brought everyone in a room, including Texas A&M and others who had done a bunch of regression analysis and sophisticated stuff there. Anyway, we brought them all together, and we made bronze out of it, right? We merged all these ideas, and we came out with, okay, we're going to have several options. There's not just one way to do this. And yeah, that's kind of the birth of it, I guess, for this audience.
That was the NEMVP, or is it NMVP? What was it?
Yeah, I went through several iterations. I will write the history for this pretty soon. Not that anybody's really interested, but just to document it. It was BMVP for a while. It was NEMVP the first time. And then, yeah, the second version out became IPMVP, International. The first version was in that NAFTA era. Again, Clinton, 93, 94, 95, North American M&V protocol. Then we just went out and said it's international. It's anywhere in the world.
Got it. Yeah,
I think the thing that's, I'm not seeing any questions yet, or if I am,
don't worry about it. We'll get to the questions later. We're still talking.
Yeah, I think the thing that's I want to reiterate early on, because John and I, you deal, John, a lot with performance contracting and people in that real world, and we know that I've seen a lot of people here that the IPMVP, let's just say up front, it's 25 years now, and when it was born, it was for that specific purpose. Although there were people on the committees that said, we're also going to need to do custom programs and custom projects and utility programs.
Wait. It was for ESCOs initially. That's what it was based on.
I mean, that's my perspective. And that's what, a lot of people were saying. It's for energy service contracts where the ESCO's involved, and everyone's going to try and keep each other honest.
Right.
But what I think and for those of us that came in from a performance contracting perspective, we saw M&V as an answer to the contract. You define the savings in the contract, how you're going to arrange it, and you make your M&V plan fit your definition. For instance, if the owner's not responsible for the lights being turned on and off for the next 6 months, like Lawrence Berkeley Lab, you don't put that in the M&V plan. You stipulate that. That's where Option E was born. I'll just say, ASHRAE never took that approach. There's another angle to this, which is savings can be quantified exactly. Just give me time, money, and tools, and I'll go do it for any project. And then savings is conceptually some scientific number that can be derived with enough insight into, or effort. So I think fundamentally that's the distinction that's been lost for the most part, John, that we talk about. I believe savings are defined for each project by the participants involved. M&V plans created, followed. Two different people looking at the same project might get different answers depending on how they define that savings up front. And you're nodding, yeah. So that's something that keeps getting lost in these arguments. So again, 25 years later, IPMVP had plenty of time to be falling off the radar. ASHRAE finally did come out with the first, and then the second, and now the third. The Australians did a fantastic job. I was just going through this. This document, I mean, this best practice guide to M&V from 2011 or something. I don't know why they didn't just win the battle for M&V protocols. It's concise, it's clear. It's got 2004. Every other country in the world pretty much has written their own protocol. China just asked me, can I write them a new one? This guy from the grid there. the fundamentals haven't changed at all. And that's when we say it's simple. We never declared early on, we being ASHRAE and or IPMVP, is we're adopting the counterfactual argument. That's the simple part.
Sorry, I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. What's counterfactual?
We're saying, yes, all the king's horses and men can measure down to the precise atom now, and you'll be able to do it throughout the time and in the future. We can measure and quantify what's happening in the real world pretty well up to that Heisenberg uncertainty limit, or with enough money. We will never know in the future what would have happened without our project. We can never know that exactly. That's unknowable. What this building or this facility is going to look like 2 years from now, we don't have a parallel twin, right? So we've got to create one. That's the counterfactual. The counterfactual is we know our method requires in the future us to compare what happens to something. What is that something? That's the basis. That's how simple this is. You got to agree on how you're going to construct the something to compare to later. So it's this time shifting thing. That's the whole game. That's how simple this is.
So let's go back. Let's go back to history in ASHRAE. So ASHRAE did have their ASHRAE 14 committee. And it seemed to me that when that came out, all of a sudden things got a lot more complicated. There was like the prescribed, there was these two different paths for, acceptance, at least for I think it was for just option C, or maybe it's for all 4 different options. And that was more complicated. And then the whole idea of CVRMSE, there were different levels based on how many bills you had and all this other stuff. And it just wasn't so simple anymore. And then they threw in all of the uncertainty started showing up, I think, in there too.
So that's a good point. So again, the IPMVP at 25 years old has gotten reduced in size. That the core concepts document, which is the primary document, is smaller even, and just goes back and espouses how simple the concept is. The application of the concept can get as complex as you want to get, complicated. And yeah, ASHRAE, again, if you look at even the title, they stuck to their guns on measurement of savings, energy and demand savings. So the whole approach here was that you can go out and there should be a minimum standard. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it's important right now because EVO is still generating documents. And I believe the core concept is really simple. As soon as you get 2 or 3 people in a room talking about it and their language differs a little bit, you've lost the art, you've lost the concept. You can really quickly lose that. And that's what I see around the world with experts who aren't saying the same thing when they talk about baseline or baseline adjustments. And that's what I see as still the core problem, which is getting everyone to sing the same song at the same time in the same rhythm over time. So ASHRAE went for a different goal, though. They were claiming that could scientifically measure savings in every project, and that's what you should do, and there should be a minimum threshold. Well, it turns out the third version of this, which is coming out now, their meetings, is 2000. First one was 2002, so 8 years after we started the first committee meeting. It took 8 years. The second one took 12 years more, and now it's 2000, and we're looking at the third version. So, and Dennis Landsberg, the chairman of the committee, just wrote me, they're going to take out any requirements because it's not a standard, it's a guideline. So, yeah, the word, this is very important, and we don't all agree. What is IPMVP? Is it a standard, a protocol, a guideline, a framework, and what does that mean? So if you don't even know that, if you don't have consensus around that, I have my opinion. They're going to have to change that requirement. There's no more requirements because it's a guideline and it's not a standard. Standard sets minimum requirements, and IPMVP pretty much never did that. It gave guidance, not requirements.
But one of the things though with ASHRAE 14 when it first came out was they weren't saying that you could exactly say the savings, at least on option C. What they were saying was that savings should be within what, 68%? Something like
twice the standard error. So the savings should be visible within twice the standard error. They don't tell you what to do if the data doesn't support that. I mean, yeah, that gets to the things, John, that we talked about a little bit. What I like about this industry is still what I like teaching, because I hang my hat on, I have firm ground to stand on certain things that are unequivocal. There is an ASHRAE document. There is a FEMP document. I mean, that sounds trivial, you know, but these are documents, and they say certain things, and it's also unequivocal. They say different things within them sometimes. So there are contradictions, and you have to get used to that. And then, you know, yeah, there's just forgot where I was going with that one exactly. Keep going, and we'll get back to it.
I'm 68% sure. I am 68% certain that the savings is going to be within whatever percent of this number, which all of a sudden is no longer useful for performance now we're escaping the whole purpose, if you ask me, of what M&V was about, which was, here's a very simple way we do things. The customer's going to understand it. They're not mathematicians or statisticians. They'll get it. You save this much. And the performance contractors know they didn't save that much. They saved about that much. But the customer is never going to get that uncertainty stuff. I don't think they'll ever understand that.
So that's a point of view. I think you can state that almost unequivocally that you believe that. What I believe is unequivocal about the method, since you're applying the counterfactual argument, which means you have to take the data you have in a baseline period, which you then also define. You take the data you have, and you can quickly and easily and get a CV RMSE. That's one of these tricks, right? You just learn the 6 tricks to take the data, and you'll get the answer. It's not hard at all. Everyone should get the same answer for the CV RMSE for a set of data. It may take a little trick to learn how to do that, but once everyone's done that, they're done. But now what do you do if it's 40% or 41%? Can you use that model if the savings are not, well, the root mean squared error? If the savings aren't twice the root mean squared error, it's not likely. Now you're getting really equivocal that you'll be able to see the savings. So yeah, the judgment call, that's a good point. So I don't know those of you that have taken the CMVP or not. This is where we part ways, and it's really simple again. I believe the progress of energy efficiency as an industry depends on a strong cadre of educated people who understand the concept of M&V, share the language, and move anywhere in the world lockstep on demonstrating how it's done. I believe that's really important for M&V because it's not something you can just drop a protocol into, say, a junior high class and they go calculate savings every time. And again, backing up, because also the cost thing, but having spent a lot of time in the field, I know that every building's different and every opportunity is different. So you've got to have that ability to make judgments. And that's why we're trying to train this 10,000 people in CMVP. And we have trained 10,000. We're continually training roughly 1,000 a year around the world. Now with online, we can actually open that up. There's a lot more potential. So yeah, I believe that the focus should be on getting as many of us as possible. And thank you all for showing up and caring about this, that when we speak, we understand each other. And when we speak to our bosses and our CEOs and others in the industry, they all understand us. I had this nice little thing made up for the AEE class. I want my students to go out to the expo and talk to all the vendors of metering equipment, of which they're has anybody been to an AEE expo lately? Like a third of the vendors, you and I, John, we always run into each other. They're meter guys now, and they're all claiming they can do, M&V. So, but do they really understand that is it really a science that they can just do it? Or do they understand how much judgment's involved?
That part, no. So the IPMVP committees, or I don't know about all the committees, I'm on one of them, and it's the one I'm on is mostly utility people who do evaluations, EM&V and stuff like that. And they speak a different language than ESCO people. And what, to me, it seems like, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but the whole IPMVP is kind of like the Democratic or Republican Party. It doesn't matter which party, so we don't have to get political, but you have people who are fire breathers about one issue and then people who totally disagree with them on that issue, but they're fire breathers about another issue. And you just try to put them all in one house and they don't all really get along or agree. And that's kind of what it seems to me is going on with EVO, in that the utility folks, they have different objectives than ESCO folks. And they're different types of people. The utility people are very super highly educated people, whereas the ESCO people, we're rank and file. They call us practitioners. We're engineers. And we're smart, but we don't have PhDs. And it seems like, or I'm not convinced that really there needs to be one standard for both groups, that maybe there should be a different organization for the utility people than for the ESCO people.
Well, you brought up several things at once, and I'll say, you know, EVO as an organization, let's say we could say unequivocally, it's still there. It's running primarily as an organization that certifies individuals in CMVP in terms of financially and commercially. It's got other interests it's trying to do around the world. It's got the newsletter. It's bringing people together in committees. So it's serving numerous functions, and they're coming out with the non-routine adjustments guide soon, which is again a hybrid between these worlds you're talking about. But let's go to those worlds, and let's remember. And I think I do it less justice than it probably should get. I mean, because my perspective was, again, working for FEMP to get a protocol. When we created IPMVP, the evaluation world was there, and that was Steve Schiller primarily, right? So again, that whole world and those people and trying to get the answer right for custom projects, one-off, it was there. That's why it's been used and it's been referenced in so many programs around the world for utility programs where it's custom. Here's what's different now. Utility bill analysis has been around forever. I mean, Meg Fells, Princeton, Prism, Texas A&M, being able to take large numbers, and your whole stuff, and Robert Sonderegger before, you know, taking large numbers of bills and saying something about them is been around forever. So they're just so intertwined. What's different is as you're developing the next level. So where are we? The deployment of vast numbers of AMI infrastructure, of meters, smart meters, and the smart data. It's out there. And yeah, certainly using metered data on buildings to assess something is now it's available to a lot of people, and a lot of people with money, utility programs, are trying to figure out how to use them. So they're hiring smart people, and they're looking at how do we solve this problem generally for large numbers of buildings and smart meters and all this data. And that's a big, gnarly, complicated problem. It's not complex conceptually. You got to take a baseline period, document it, compare it in the future, right? Conceptually, it's really simple. Now the challenges are, again, are you taking a risk and responsibility view on it from a performance contract, or is it a utility program where you have a code standard you might be comparing to, or other things, other actors on the stage, so to speak? So the context really matters, and that's the first thing. Actually, I teach when I teach the CMVP is why are you in the room? What's your context? How are we going to apply the protocol for your purposes? Until you know that, you really can't apply judgment, because you can't exclude some market, so to speak. So I think yeah, we can go on that, riff on that a little more, but definitely bringing it back to the committees right now at EVO are trying to solve the problem. The biggest one coming out is the non-routine adjustment. And that's something, again, historically, that got kind of passed over from IPMVP because it was, you know, well, it's almost completely judgment-based. There's not a scientific approach to it. So 25 years later, that's where we are. And if you want to, you know, try to segue into where we're going, you know, where we're going, one thing is getting that document out and seeing how it floats in the marketplace, seeing what improvements can be made to it to make it generalizable and useful for all the communities out there. That's what's going to have to happen next on that one. And it's a big one.
But tell me about, so what do you think about that comment of mine about the two worlds? And maybe they don't belong in the same tent, or they don't belong with the same guideline. You know, that's so, I don't know if we had this conversation, John, but I've been having it with members of the committee writing that document over the last 2 years. It was at the ACEEE, and a bunch of people from utility programs primarily were saying we really need a document that lays out what non-routine adjustments mean in this new world. And if I back up to the reason is, you and I and most of the people on this meeting, I'm sure, want efficiency to work every way we can. And if you live in California, you've got immediate, I mean, you know, argue about whether that climate change is immediately we're going to be able to do anything by making buildings more efficient. But in the long run, most of us are in this industry because we believe every effort that can be put forth at every level to utilize our resources better is just a good thing. So we need tools to help us understand how that works. Utility programs look at it with a certain set of preconceptions that need to be addressed administratively, legally, to get those programs working. And they're often really complex, and they require a certain type of thinking. Performance contracting is usually site by site. The same concept applied. You can take shortcuts and simplifications with everyone involved agreeing to it. Again, that's why I want CMVPs or trained people on both sides of every deal, and you can go in
assess the situation quickly, see what the M&V plan should be for that project, knock it out and move on. That way that there's just more work being done in efficiency, right? So anything we can do to help both industries, so to speak, make efficiency more transactional and just get on with it. Don't argue about it, because it's hugely equivocal. That's the thing. And if you start studying it from every angle, there's nowhere to stop. There's, it's not an answer that's going to get resolvable really quick in most cases until you've taken certain adjustments up front.
All right. I mean, I could just keep. Yeah, I don't think you really answered my question. That's all. But,
well, here's
okay.
So Kevin just jumped in. I don't know if you were asking him to speak as well, but so ESCO. So Evo has known for a while that the document, which has survived 25 years, let's just put it out there again. That was not a free. We didn't know. International Standards Organization came up with a whole series of documents. And from an Evo perspective, we thought that might supersede us and we'd be done. ASHRAE came out twice, right? Lots of other protocols have come. There's an SEM protocol, superior energy performance. There's an industry that generates protocols. I've been part of it. I've also watched from the side, kind of laughing, like, oh, another one? And that's back to, it's all the same simple concept. It's how do you take what's happening now, document it well enough that in the future, when you compare to it, people won't argue. They're bought into that concept. It ain't scientific at that point. It's an agreed upon structure. So Kevin's brightly saying, Evo's known that for a while. The utility programs have a different way of looking at what that means to look a year or two from now, because they've got all of society to worry about, right? Your performance contract, you're worried about the parties involved in that project. Utility programs have to think about the ratepayers, equity, all these other things. That all gets bundled into their protocol. And so Evo is coming up with a utility impact evaluation protocol. But Kevin and others, that world's been populated by the AESP, by the IEPEC. I mean, they've had their own industry in the US for 30 years as well. We've been in parallel fashion. We just don't cross-populate. Outside the US, it's much more amorphous. They're all, they're overlapping. But in the US, you had Association of Energy Service Professionals and an International Energy Program Evaluation Conference, the only acronym that's worse than IPMVP, or as bad. Those two, dominate the industry, and they're well-attended conferences and huge bodies of knowledge that are similar but slightly different. So there's a lot of overlap there. Maybe you're not seeing that as much.
I got a question I mean, this has come up many times, and I've read the document and I don't understand it because it's so, it doesn't say anything, at least to me. There's certain things I can read, I just don't understand what they're saying because they don't say, to me, they don't say anything. That's ISO 50,000, or is it 50,000.1? I don't know which one. They say it's an M&V or something like that. Can you explain why that's different from the IPMVP?
Yeah, so what's really interesting there, and let me just, yeah, I can. So ISO was originated 50,001 as an effort, and it was led by our friends, the Department of Energy again, which, by the way, just stepping back a second, and historically, which is, we're trying to do a lot of things on this call, but historically, the industry, again, in New Jersey, other places had come up with standards for some of the pieces of the work, but there wasn't a national standard. There wasn't any attempt at an international standard or international guidance. So, I'd say you got to tip your hat to the leadership at that point, get Greg Katz, Art Rosenfeld, to create a national single document that could integrate federal programs and the commercial interests, the NAESCO interests, bring us all together, keep us in a room long enough that something came out that was useful, an amalgam of the methods. And I believe 25 years later, the hard work that was done to create that consensus on a range of options, not just one, that's what's sort of fascinating to have survived. Yeah, so that's good. So now you got ISO comes in a few years later and says, we want to push, fundamentally, International Standards Organization was pushing a management standard. So their perspective was, and if you remember, the FEMP program, the absolute requirements of M&V to the FEMP program and the ESPC, or the super ESCO, as they called it, single whole regions, which would get a IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. You don't even want to know all the contractual hoops they had to go through to fit M&V into federal procurement. That's a whole sub call. And those procurement agents are tough, right? And they want you to keep in their lines. So IDIQ, they formed a type of contracting and they fit the protocol to match all that. That's why IPMVP and these options, and 70% of is option A now. What they didn't do is go out to industry and say, okay, you're going to operate and you want to be certified, and we want to create a certification for every industry in the world that you can claim your organization is implementing best practice energy management, that you're doing good things with your energy. What does that sound like? You know, it's a concept that came up on LinkedIn a couple of days ago that came up first time for me in 2002 from Peter Garforth, which is energy productivity. And I've at different points in my life thought we would jump out of energy efficiency into energy productivity. It's a much more, it's a better metric in the long run. What are you getting for the energy you're procuring? Not just did you reduce it, but are you actually getting more out of it? What's the denominator problem? If it's a Toyota plant, you're getting more Toyotas per kilowatt or megawatt hour in, or whatever. You know, there should be some, anyway, productivity is highly aligned with 50001 and ISO. It's what is your organization doing? What's your output? And how much energy is it taking to do that across sometimes an entire supply chain? So they started with a white sheet of paper pretty much when they were looking at their M&V protocol. And, you know, it's like anything else in the world, when you're looking at an operating system and you're intending to change it and then optimize it, you end up in a plan, do, act, Six Sigma cycle, something like it, which is what IPMVP is. Document what's there, say what you're going to do to change it, and see if what you did worked. It's again, really, really, really simple. So they did that, but then they had to fit it in with all these other constructs about energy management up and down the organizational chain and across long supply chains, and it got really complex. However, what they resolved down to in 50,015, which is a subcase, basically numerous people on the committees were also already IPMVP folks, and they adopted, you know, nominally most of our structure, which is, okay, you can either do whole building or isolation. And you can either do statistical methods with data you have, or you can do simulations with characteristics of the site. So they broke it down the same way, really. And they stole our term non-routine adjustments, and they stole our entire, I say this jokingly since this is being recorded, but I mean, you know, they adopted all the same principles, basically, with slightly different words. And that's my big bugaboo. If you're gonna have the same concept, use the same words. Otherwise, people start arguing over needlessly. So yeah. 50,001 is really driven by a whole other industry, which then is supported by its consulting, it's welfare for consultants too. You want to be certified, certifier to certify people, do all these steps. It's costly, but presumably there's some market advantage if you can say you're 50,001 certified, you get certain contracting rights in certain countries, right? Back to procurement. Your organizations.
Not in the United States, right? I know some U.S. government agencies seem to want it.
Yeah, the DOE pushing it internationally for 50,001. Roland Risser, who had been at PG&E here, was leading a lot of those back in 2011 on. And then they also were pushing things like the superior energy performance, which looks a lot like strategic energy management, which looks a lot like global superior energy performance. So it's a proliferation of program types, all very similar, with slight differences.
I went to this, I was at an AEE World show once, and I saw this woman she was an M&V professional, and her job really, this is how she makes her money, was to reconcile maybe 12 to 16 different M&V protocols or standards or whatever the hell. But that's what she did. That was it. She seemed to know what each said and all this, the nuances between each. And I just was amazed and felt so stupid to be a human being. It's like, why do we have to keep making new ones when we already have a good one? Yeah, I was pretty upset after watching that. Any comments on all that? All these protocols, and why do we need so many?
Yeah, I've watched and wonder. I gave a talk at LBL a few years ago. It's that old joke that came off of one of the XKCD or whatever. You've got 13 standards. Let's bring them together and create a new one. Now you have 14 standards.
Exactly.
The next year, we got 14 standards. Let's bring them all together. I mean, there's something like that that's going on. There's something fundamental. John, I'd love to get to the bottom of it, and I'd like to see some more feedback from people listening. But I believe the fundamental issue at this point, late in my career, is that misunderstanding of the goal of M&V in terms of, are you looking for a scientific answer about that facility, independent of the impacts of risk responsibility of the operations, or are you trying to deem a number that is good enough for the participants, understanding you'll never have there's no single perfect answer? Are you taking risk and reward into consideration? And that's what FEMP went and did. They wrote a whole risk reward part of their protocol. So I think certain people have come to the conclusion that yes, option A is a reasonable thing. Often, actually frequently, because it's just not worth learning more, spending more money on M&V if you're pretty certain about how things are going to go, and you look at that risk profile. Other places, no, you really want to learn every aspect. I mean, I'm working on the Savings by Design program in California, year 2 of the evaluation, and we're tearing apart these programs, these projects one by one, and we're going to calibrate the models, and we're going to spend all this time on a few models in the program to better understand how that program is working. We could never afford to do it just for that site, right? But when you see like where the program applied modeling properly or not, and the model can't say model primary secondary loop well at all, just the fundamental DO21E doesn't do that. So that's an issue. If you can't model the long line of measures that's coming, which are all of them more sophisticated, cool beams, demand control, ventilation, all the stuff that's coming needs to be modeled properly. So there's definitely a role for advanced, articulate, smart M&V to better figure out how these programs should work, but you can't afford to do it on every project. So yeah, understanding that, like getting that core thing into people's brains would be my my hope. And then understanding when she would say this is indicative of we need to have a more sophisticated plan here because not just because there's one way to do M&V for every project. And that's, I'll just say last thing. I mean, these big programs where now with smart meters, people are saying I have 500 or 1,000 buildings. How am I going to do M&V on them? Well, you're not doing IPMVP M&V, and that's where maybe Kevin Warren's utility thing can inform people. You're doing a different kind of M&V, same concept, but you're not going to go in and understand every building on the non-routine adjustment side. What's really happening?
Okay, this is kind of, it goes back to, I guess, or maybe I keep going back to the same old point. Maybe it's getting a little tired for some of you guys listening, but by adding all of these further and further complications, which really don't apply to ESCOs, why do we have to burden ourselves with having to read all this stuff when we don't read it? Why can't we just have a simple ESCO document? Look, this is how you do it. In fact, FEMP guidelines, if you ask me, that's the document. That's got it. It's got nice, simple, great M&V plans, or they're not always simple, but it explains everything very clearly. And then we don't have to go off into outer space with all this, academia, which I don't think is necessary.
I can't argue that. Just tell people to use that.
Yeah.
I mean, for some people, that's definitely the way to go. I mean, yeah, and yeah, that's it. We didn't totally answer that other question, which is, why are there so many protocols? because again, fundamentally, people think there's some answer out there that hasn't been found yet, right? I mean, why are there so many revisions of the Bible? God, if we just get the language right, everyone will understand the story.
That's right.
No, the story's pretty simple, man. It's like 10 Commandments. So that's everything else is whatever.
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, everyone, and then people somehow this framework thing, IPMVP, it just sounds too simple. It's got to be it's got to be a better answer. It's got to be something smart people can figure out. The difference between smart and good judgment, that's the thing. Knowing when smart's going to help and knowing when good enough is good enough. I don't know how you teach good judgment. That's our goal.
Got it. So you wanted to talk a little bit about where M&V is going? Did you touched on? Is there more you wanted to say?
Well, yeah, I'm pretty excited about, like everyone who's in energy is that we're not with our grandfather's energy system or our father's energy system or mothers or whatever, however you want to put it. But over time, how we, as a society, generally provide the benefits of controlled energy, controlled power through copper wires, into the house, or delivering volatile fuels in pipes to our properties or tanks, whatever we do to deliver energy to do what we want to do. That took a lot of different paths, or took major turns in its path, and arrived at these answers of these large integrated utilities, massive amounts of capital stored in one group, and hence and then they're being nominally the provider of these services, of the energy itself, and then we turn that energy into the services we want, so we can build more lights in our house, or better air conditioning, ventilation. All our buildings can be manipulated at our asset end, small amount of money compared to the assets put collectively. And now that's all changing, right? Because that at least was stable to the degree, and even Clinton came up with this at his talk at the AEE talk. I mean, someone asked him about performance contracting, and Bill Clinton gave an incredibly astute answer, which is, well, the thing about performance contracting is, you got to talk to a lot of people, and there's no real clear way to measure the benefit. And the industry itself has not aligned to have decades of experience in allocating the capital. Let me explain. Your public utility commissions and the banks and Westinghouse all know how to build a plant and finance it and get it installed and get rates to supply it. That's all mapped. And that's where we were, until relatively recently. And now we've got, what is it today, 10, 11 gigawatts of solar generating in California. And it turns off at the end of the day, and suddenly we have to mix our solar resource with those plants that are sitting idle all day. So it's a whole different, capital allocation model. Not to mention storage. So, well, Elon Musk shows up with Tesla, and now you can put a power wall up, and you can put your own, So the whole thing about energy and supplying it and using it. Ohm Connect is going to reward me with points for turning off my power for an hour tonight. What does that do to my baseline? What does that do to the fundamental model we've used, which is you can take a performing system in a certain amount of time in the baseline and compare it in the future, making some minor adjustments. Well, when electricity is actually, they'll pay you to take it off the wires in the middle of the day because there's so much of it on certain parts of the grid. It's a negative price. That's really different. Efficiency just changed completely, and M&V has to change to adapt to that. So the short answer is, what I think is exciting is there's going to be a requirement for the smart folks who really are smart, brilliant, dedicated to learning how to run simulation models, dedicated to data analysis, be doing hourly and sub-hourly analysis on buildings to really understand impacts in this new economic world, where it's not a rate structure of 10 cents a kilowatt hour, or even it's a whole different world going forward. So we have to adapt to that.
It's more about, so that's what I keep seeing Recurve talking about. It's more about when they're saving energy. We don't care if they're saving energy at nighttime. Who cares? Or even, we don't even care if they're saving energy in the daytime anymore. We only care when they're saving energy during the late afternoons and early evenings. That's all we really care about anymore. Those are the kilowatt hours that they want. And that's maybe not the performance contracting world. That's in the utility world.
Yeah, but we as the arbiters of that, we are the ones. Everyone on this call, I'm assuming, cares about being the person that's going to help settle the accounts at the end of the day. What was the good generated from my project? All right, let's look at the problem. Let's settle the accounts. That's settlement. And if we're interested in that, we're going to need tools that accurately reflect the pricing signals that are coming off the grid now. And that's being changed completely by the fact that we just purchased 100 million. What was 100? I forget the number on the number, but it's the cost of the solar panels and the solar installations in California and the wind. But yeah, we have at some points of the day now 50, 60% carbon-free power. We could run the whole California economy on non-carbon right now, which is pretty damn amazing. The question is, in the evening when we turn.
When there's forest fires. When there's forest fires, all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore.
There's things like that. There's anomalies, but the point is, when you're layering that on top of a grid which was based on base loads that are sitting there all the time, now you're turning them off, turning them back on. The economics is all messed up for those base load plants, and also just the operations. You have to crank them back up. Well, so all these things are happening, and that means the value of how we're collecting electrons generally and putting them into our user facilities, all that's changing, and we have to be aware of that. This community has to be able to have answers for that. And that gets back to writing new protocols and stuff. Having a community that's well enough versed with and is consistent and is disciplined, and using the same terminology. How are we going to do non-routine adjustments, communicating with our clients and our outside world? Our clients being legislatures, commissioners, CEOs, all those folks, the finance industry. How do we communicate with them if we can't communicate them ourselves? So, clean up your own house, get your language right, and then when we write the next protocol, at least we're on the same page now. That's what we have to get to.
I got a question that's maybe a little bit tangential, but do you see utility rates changing any more than they have, at least electricity rates in California, because of all the solar? And I know they've shifted peak to later in the afternoon now, but do you see it becoming more incremental where it's hour by hour, or?
Yeah, somewhere here I've got that document, which was the document that kicked off the whole modern world of so what you're talking about is this dynamic pricing. This document coming out after just after the 2002, after the energy crisis. This was a series of documents by the Energy Foundation. It called for a couple of things. And one was a hugely enhanced energy efficiency program funding in California. A lot of other little more organizational administrative things like putting the M&V over in this Public Utilities Commission. But we went to $1 billion, and the other thing was supposed to be dynamic pricing and demand response. So this is now 18 years ago. This is, Severn Borenstein. I mean, Art Rosenfeld. We thought we were going to have those kind of prices a lot sooner, real-time pricing and all that, the sophisticated infrastructure to deliver that. Now the meters are there. So it's just political will now. We'll see. I think we will see it.
It is coming. It seems like it should be coming, but that's going to really fundamentally change M&V. It's going to change it.
Yeah. Okay, Kevin had to go. That's what I think is exciting. And again, I believe then, and I've dedicated my career to building a community of people that does this. And I'll just, how much time do we have, John? When do you?
Not much, actually. We got, if we have questions, but I don't think we have any, so we have up to 9 minutes.
All right, if we're going to go to the top of the hour. I think that, and Marco's kind of capturing it here. Our future baselines will be unstable, non-repeatable, non-homogeneous. Trying to find the right word. Well, let's just go back to that. So, staying pretty high level. And the point of this talk is not to dig into the details too much. I think it was to, I hope, encourage people to you've already become, but to remain active members of this community. And this community needs everyone talking a lot, surprisingly. I learned that because I actually get the opportunity to go around the world, literally, and interact with people. And certain people will say things very certainly, unequivocally, that I would say differently. And I'm not saying I'm right and them wrong. They're wrong at that moment, or all I'm saying is that's not a good thing. If people in Australia or New Zealand or India or whatever are saying something to their clients that's not what I would say about M&V, we've got a mismatch. And to the degree it's never going to erase that entirely, but it should be our endeavor to bring everyone at least in a common understanding of the issues and how we resolve them. And that's the deal. And yeah, so if we get that, that's 99% of M&V, I think. It's getting people talking right. I mean, it's just so bad, typically. Even people on this call, you've maybe seen it out there. People just say, I do IPMVP. Would you measure anything? No, we don't measure anything. We use manufacturer specs, but it's IPMVP, just that completely off the wall stuff. So we got to maintain really high best practice professional standards, communicate completely, and all of us look at the future and kind of agree, wow, yeah, the whole concept of having a stable baseline that is a fair, transparent, comparator in the future. This is this funny game we play. We agree to develop a baseline now that we will use, or someone's going to use, for a year or 2 years or 3 years down the road. In other words, we're time shifting. We're saying a year or two from now, that guy or me then will have a number that we can construe through this process. It's a process. So if you don't have a stable baseline, or if you know that even the foundations of that baseline are going to change, yeah, we're going to have to really rethink this, whether this method works in that new construct. Yeah, I think that's all. That's it.
All right. Is there any more questions? Did you see any more? Oh, I do see one just showed up.
Coming in, yeah.
Chris,
Okay, I'm looking at Chris Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm trying to stay on the build the community, keep talking, keep coming back, get more training, push at Evo and AEE to train more. But absolutely, this is what's so much fun. And I think some of my good friends are on here who are experts at this kind of thing. I mean, the whole interval meter data thing, I'm gonna say something stupid, like if you're not excited about it, you're not paying attention. I mean, it's incredibly cool. But as soon as you got a bunch of data, you got just more chances to disagree with people if they don't do it right. Big data, yeah, it doesn't automatically turn itself into meaningful insight. It's got to be managed. There's a whole different set of problems that come up with all this data. So I think, yeah, we've not yet scratched the surface from Evo IPMVP standpoint of the ability with interval meter data to show for certain retrofits, like if the retrofit was saying I'm turning lights off at night in this facility, you know, we don't. And John, your monthly billing analysis is going to have a hard time telling you if that actually happened, whereas hourly can tell us the day after. So this thing about bringing these short-term measurements back in, which was back to ASHRAE, a lot of guidance got put into the early documents in ASHRAE about, well, that's the Korean version, you know, short-term energy monitoring. Well, that's what we got the ability to do now in real time on almost every building. Really cool. So if your measure is really dependent on time and turning things off at night, you can know within a day or two if it's working. We've got to like bring that concept forward. So that's good. Let's go for a few more of these questions though. What is the best way to get more involved in these conversations? So you know, Evo is open to its committees are open. I would say, you know, I track the Evo website for there's a lot of master classes now. There's a lot more happening over there at Evo. There are good opportunities there. AE is great. You know, I think CMVP is a good program. There's LinkedIn. We're trying to add more volume to the LinkedIn on CMVP LinkedIn. And, you know, John, I'm not aware of your monthly calls here. This sounds like a good way to stay involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question.
The next one from Marco, back to the guide versus standard. Guidelines referenced by a state regulation, still a guideline, Massachusetts. Yeah, so I can say unequivocally that it's really unclear, and I'm not a lawyer, but you know, words matter. And let me just give you a short example. In California, the legislature in 2016, I believe, passed a law, in AB 802, which used the term normalized metered energy consumption. So the legislature, with no technical knowledge at all, passed a law to require California to run programs that could be the savings, could be just the before minus after, kind of our typical bread and butter, versus savings being compared to what should have been there, which was a standard code, Title 24. So the legislature came up with normalized metered energy consumption, and then it got misinterpreted whether that's normalized savings or adjusted savings. Again, the terminology started to fall apart in its implementation. And now you got experts on both sides saying they know what it meant, and they don't. So yeah, language really matters. Guidelines generally do not set any kind of thresholds or criteria for adopting. They're just general guidance on how to put together an M&B plan. Within that plan, there might be legal structure. So yeah, you'd really have to have a whiteboard out and parse out where legal issues come in, where guidelines come in different contexts. In a state, maybe the law says you have to apply it this way from the legislature. Anyway, that'd be worth a whole seminar right there, John, applying those terms. Let's go to these questions, because now we're getting low on time. That's great. Thanks, Phil.
Next one's
no questions. And Okay, Marco, I don't get your last name wrong, so I won't try. But I like this question. It's back to the key of my work in the last 15, 20 years. No, MNV 2.0 is not going to replace MNV practitioners. You've got it exactly right. Even this document that's coming out, and I'm really happy to report from Evo's viewpoint that there's a lot of great content in the non-routine adjustments guide. I'll say editorially, I think I would like to see it better link back to our core documents and the simple concepts. I call it Lego block. Make it stupid simple for some people to explain the concept, then go into detail about what MNV 2.0 or advanced MNV can do. The problem is the more refined you get the granular readings, the more you start to lose track of the correlations. For instance, if you look at my house for an hour, any 1 hour, I might have 2 kW, 2 kilowatt hours because the dishwasher and the washing machine went off that hour. So any 1 hour can be really random. Over the course of a day, it starts to stabilize out to 8 kilowatt hours a day. Over the course of the week, it gets really stable because those things happen a certain number of periodicity. So the MNV 2.0 doesn't necessarily address that yet, and it's a real challenge. And so there's a lot of things that it's going to help be able to help with. There's also some challenges there. And then there's the whole thing about non-routine adjustments. Can you tell from the data why something changed? And I would say there's no way. You still don't know what really caused that change, and you don't know there's something else changing unless you've got boots on the ground, and that's you guys. I believe
two things could be happening at the same time, or three, and you might think it's just one.
Absolutely, right? Or they might be bad things are happening, but they're getting washed out by something else going on. So your measure might be going down, but something else is happening to hide that. So I'm claiming, I hope you're hearing this loudly, and we're out of time. Yeah, join the community, be in the community. It's there for the long haul. CMVP's making judgment in the field. That's where it's at. Applying this stuff. That's what's gonna support the industry. You know, again, EE is our goal, not MNV. MNV is a tool. It's a great tool. It's a great career. It's full of a lot of fun problems and great people. And you can go globally with it, which is really cool, and speak like this really refined, cool language all over the planet now. That's useful, and it helps the industry, because otherwise what we got is smoke. And we've got, well, there's something, we don't know what happened. We can't see, touch, feel.
Buzz from like a beehive, too many people talking at the same time.
Yeah.
We should stop because it's time, and I want to go over, at least we have a couple more webinars this month. So the next one we have coming up is Motors 101. It's actually going to be a little more than 101. Yes, he's going to explain some basics on motors, but actually there's some new things going on with motors, which I think you might find interesting. I'm not one to speak with the right terms. I can just tell you very generally, but there's motors that have integrated VFDs in them now. So you don't need a separate VFD. The VFD is part of the motor. And Lonnie will probably get into that. And then option C, I'll talk a bit about option C software and how that compares to metrics in November. I haven't figured out what we're doing in December yet. And if you have any further questions that we haven't answered yet, you can email them to us. Probably Steve will be the one who will answer them. We'll just pass them on to Steve if we can't answer them ourselves. And I think that's all I've got. Yes, thanks for coming. Yes, thanks everyone. This was actually a really interesting and different seminar or webinar. Steve, thanks a lot.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks, John. Be in touch.
Take care, everyone.